you ever heard the distant roar of a massive machine long before it appears on the rails? That slow, thunderous heartbeat of metal, pistons, and steam that seems to shake the air itself? Now imagine that same sound, but instead of crawling through the countryside, the locomotive behind it is coming at more than 160 kilometers per hour. Hard to picture, right? Most people think steam trains were slow, heavy giants that took forever to accelerate. But history hides a different truth. There were locomotives so fast, so advanced, and so unbelievably powerful that even today they feel like something from a fictional universe. Machines built not only to pull freight or passengers, but to push the limits of engineering. And many of these beasts have stories full of danger, innovation, and speed records that stood untouched for decades. You're about to discover the most extreme locomotives ever built. Some crossed deserts without needing water. Some climbed mountains like they were nothing. Others shattered world records and then disappeared from the public eye. And the last one is so strange, so oversized, and so fast that many people still argue about whether its top speed was even physically possible. Let's begin with a locomotive born in one of the harshest environments on Earth. A machine built to survive where others would simply die. In 1953, deep in the heat of South Africa, engineers faced a massive challenge. How do you run a steam locomotive across hundreds of kilometers of dry desert where water is almost impossible to find? The answer became one of the rarest and smartest creations in rail history. The South African Railways Class 25, built by the North British Locomotive Company. It looked like a normal steam engine at first glance, but hidden inside was a feature almost no other locomotive ever had. Instead of releasing steam into the air like every traditional engine, it captured the steam, cooled it, and reused it. Imagine a giant moving recycling system. The result was a range far greater than anything else running in the region. With over 4,000 horsepower and a boiler pressure of 225 psi, it could reach 120 kilometers per hour while pulling tons of cargo through dry, silent landscapes. Standing next to it was like standing beside a metal dragon. You'd hear the deep rhythmic chug echoing across the open desert long before the locomotive came into view. Drivers needed real skill to operate it, constantly adjusting valves and pressure. But when everything worked right, the Class 25 moved with a mix of grace and brute force. Today, a few of these giants survive, some even shipped back to the UK after retirement, where railway fans restored them to their former glory. And one of them still has a fully working condensation system. Seeing it in motion is like watching a forgotten chapter of engineering come back to life. But if you think desert locomotives are impressive, wait until you hear about a machine built not for sand, but for the brutal mountains of the American West. During World War II, the United States needed locomotives that could climb the Rocky Mountains with long trains behind them and do it quickly. That's how the Union Pacific Challenger 3985 was born. Built in 1943 by the American Locomotive Company, this beast had 4 cylinders spread across 2 massive articulated frames. In simple terms, the engine could bend while moving, giving it stability and power on sharp curves. With nearly 5,000 horsepower, the Challenger could hit 110 kilometers per hour, even while pulling long freight, consists through steep grades. That was unheard of at the time. Standing 37 meters long and weighing more than 270 tons, the Challenger looked less like a locomotive and more like a rolling fortress. When it accelerated, the sound was a deep metallic roar paired with massive white plumes of steam that could be seen from kilometers away. After retirement, something incredible happened. Railfans and Union Pacific worked together to restore it. And in the 1980s, it returned to the rails, running special trips where it still reached near top speeds. One journey covered over 1,600 kilometers in a single event. Imagine that, a 1940s locomotive pulling modern passengers at speeds that would still impress today. But if the Challenger was a fortress, the next machine on this list was an empire all by itself. Bigger, louder, and more intimidating than almost anything before or after it. In 1941, Union Pacific decided it wanted the ultimate locomotive. Something so powerful that it could haul enormous trains across mountain ranges without needing extra engines for support. And what emerged was the Union Pacific Big Boy, a name that fits perfectly. Built by Alco, the Big Boy is still considered one of the largest steam locomotives ever constructed. Picture a 40-meter-long beast weighing more than 540 tons, capable of hitting 130 kilometers per hour. The numbers barely sound real. Its engine produced over 6,300 horsepower. Its traction system, a massive 4884 configuration, gave it strength on curves while keeping the giant stable at high speeds. When you stood beside a Big Boy, you didn't feel like you were looking at a train, you felt like you were staring at a moving skyscraper. Steam poured out like fog, and the sound of the pistons was powerful enough to rattle your chest. Used mostly between Wyoming and Utah, it hauled coal and other heavy loads during and after the war. And in 2019, miracles struck again. One of the surviving Big Boys was restored and returned to operation. During its historic tour, thousands lined the tracks just to catch a glimpse. Watching it thunder past is something you never forget. But as impressive as the Americans were, the British weren't far behind. And sometimes smaller locomotives carried just as much personality and speed. In 1946, the 34,028 Eddystone rolled out of British workshops, part of the West Country class. Unlike the giant American locomotives, this one was built for speed and elegance rather than brute strength. Named after the famous Eddystone Lighthouse, it carried the spirit of resilience and endurance. Equipped with 3 cylinders and a boiler pushing 250 psi, it produced around 2,300 horsepower. That might sound small compared to American giants, but the design was clever, optimized, and efficient. And it could reach 145 kilometers per hour, a stunning number for its size. Imagine standing at a bridge station in the late 1940s. The wind shifts. You hear a sharp, accelerating whistle. Then through the morning fog, a sleek, low-profile locomotive emerges with aerodynamic fairings and a dark, stylish paint job. That's the Eddystone, rushing passengers from Bournemouth and Exeter to London. Its sound wasn't deep like the Big Boy, it was sharper, lighter, almost sporty. In fact, during its restoration decades later, engineers discovered newspapers stuffed inside its walls. Used as insulation since the 1950s, a small reminder of the era it was built in. But as beautiful as the Eddystone was, the next locomotive had even more prestige. Not just speed, prestige. The Castle Class locomotives were introduced by the Great Western Railway in 1923. These were the champions of British rail travel for decades. Built for express passenger routes, they were powerful, elegant, and so reliable that even the British royal family trusted them. With 4 cylinders and a 225 psi boiler, they produced around 2,000 horsepower and could reach speeds close to 145 kilometers per hour. That was extremely fast at the time. Their long bodies, large driving wheels, and signature green color made them instantly recognizable. People waiting on platforms knew when a Castle-class locomotive approached, not just by sound, but by its clean, confident motion across the rails. Models like the Caerphilly Castle became symbols of British engineering, and some like the 4079 Pendennis Castle ended up traveling all the way to Australia for special events. These locomotives didn't just run, they represented the golden age of British express travel. But while the UK was crafting elegant speed machines, the Americans were cooking up something far more extreme. Something that flew down the tracks like a missile. Enter the Norfolk and Western 611. Built in 1950, this locomotive was the peak of American steam engineering, streamlined, aerodynamic, and brutally fast. Powered by a 6-cylinder engine and a boiler pushing 300 psi, the 611 produced more than 5,100 horsepower. In tests, it exceeded 180 kilometers per hour, even more shocking during regular commercial routes. It maintained speeds above 160. That's the kind of performance that would impress even modern high-speed trains. Its rounded design sliced through the air with minimal drag, and its glossy black paint made it look like a futuristic bullet train from the past. Passengers loved it. Engineers admired it. And even after retirement, people demanded its return. It was restored twice, attracting crowds of over 100,000 visitors in a single week. Watching the 611 at full throttle is like watching a living rocket on steel rails. But Germany wasn't about to be left out of the race. In 1961, long after steam locomotives were becoming outdated, the Germans built an experimental machine, so advanced it looked like a time traveler from the future. The DR-18201 was its name. A bright red aerodynamic monster born in East Germany. It was created not for commercial use, but to test the limits of steam power one last time. With 3 cylinders, 245 psi pressure, and nearly 3,000 horsepower, it smashed through speed barriers and hit 180 kilometers per hour during tests. The world was switching to electric trains, but the engineers behind the 18201 wanted to prove something. Steam was still alive and still dangerous. Its sleek red body and sharp lines made it look more like a modern express locomotive than a steam relic. It ran on special services and became a prized symbol of German rail innovation. Even during the Cold War, engineers from outside the Eastern Bloc admitted the 18201 was a masterpiece. And the best part? It still runs today on special trips, drawing crowds who want to see a piece of mechanical art fly down the tracks. But if you think speed is everything, wait until you meet a locomotive built for a very different kind of competition, a British beauty that temporarily became the fastest steam locomotive in the world. In 1937, the LMS Coronation Class 6220 made its debut. Painted in a dramatic blue with silver stripes, it didn't just look fast, it was fast. Powered by 4 cylinders and a 250 psi boiler producing around 2,500 horsepower, it reached 181 kilometers per hour during a test run. For a short time, it held the world speed record. This locomotive wasn't just about numbers. It was about pride. Britain wanted to show the world that its railways were still leaders in innovation. And the Coronation did exactly that. It ran between London and Glasgow, carrying first-class passengers in unmatched style. One of its sister locomotives, the 6229 Duchess of Hamilton, survives today with its full aerodynamic fairing restored. Standing next to it feels like standing beside a steel sculpture built for motion, but records are made to be broken. And soon another British locomotive would completely rewrite history. In 1938, just 1 year after the Coronation Class showed its power, the London and North Eastern Railway revealed a machine that looked like it came straight from a futuristic dream. Its name was the Mallard LNER Class A44468, designed by Sir Nigel Greasley. It had one job: break the steam speed record. And it did it in spectacular fashion. On July 3, 1938, the Mallard reached a mind-blowing 202.8 kilometers per hour. That number still stands today as the official world record for a steam locomotive. No other steam engine has ever beaten it. The Mallard wasn't just fast, it was engineered to be fast. Its 3-cylinder layout, 250 psi boiler, and aerodynamic fairing were all designed to reduce drag and maximize speed. The body had smooth curves, inspired by the shape of a water droplet. That's where the name Mallard came from, a wild duck known for fast, graceful motion. People who witnessed the record run described the sound as a screaming roar. Not the slow puffing of an old train, but a fierce, high-speed battle between steam pressure and the wind. Even during regular service on the London-Edinburgh line, it easily cruised above 150 kilometers per hour. For the 1930s, that was almost unbelievable. After retirement, the Mallard became a national treasure. It now rests in the National Railway Museum in York. In 2013, something incredible happened. All surviving 4 locomotives were reunited for a historic display. Thousands came to see them lined up like legendary heroes of a bygone era. And in the center, shining blue with its iconic streamlined shape, stood the Mallard, the king of steam speed. But if the Mallard was a king, the next locomotive was a giant, a titan, so large and so powerful that its numbers barely make sense. And its top speed. That's still one of the most controversial topics in rail history. The year was 1939. The United States was showing off new technology at the New York World's Fair, and the Pennsylvania Railroad wanted something dramatic, something that would grab the attention of the entire world. What they unveiled was the PRRS-1, known simply as the Big Engine. This locomotive was enormous. At more than 42 meters long, it was longer than some modern aircraft. Its sleek, polished body featured Art Deco curves and chrome trim, giving it a futuristic look decades ahead of its time. With a 6-cylinder steam engine, a colossal boiler pushing 300 psi, and around 6,500 horsepower, the S1 was a mechanical monster. On paper, it could reach 160 kilometers per hour. But unofficial reports claim something far more shocking, that the S1 may have exceeded 200 kilometers per hour during test runs. If true, that would place it in the same category as the Mallard, or even higher. But there's a problem. No official timing equipment was used. The numbers were based on running time between mile markers. So historians still argue about whether the S1 secretly set a record that was never recognized. What isn't disputed is how advanced the locomotive was. Its unusual wheel arrangement, called a 6-4-4-6, made it powerful but also difficult to maneuver. It struggled in tight rail yards because it was simply too big. Only one S1 was ever built. It served for a few years and then vanished from history, eventually scrapped. But its impact echoes today. Artists and filmmakers still use its design as inspiration. And among rail fans, the S1 remains one of the greatest what-if machines of all time. As we've seen, steam locomotives were far more than slow-burning giants from the past. They were experiments, innovations, engineering marvels that pushed the boundaries of what steel, fire, and water could do. But to wrap up this journey, let's look back at what made these machines so unforgettable. Across continents, steam locomotives carried nations into the future. In South Africa, the Class 25 crossed deserts with a unique condensation system. In the United States, the Challenger and Big Boy conquered mountains with raw power. In the United Kingdom, the Eddystone and Castle class carried passengers with elegance and speed. In Germany, the DR 18201 showed that even late in the steam era, innovation hadn't run out. The Coronation briefly held the crown of fastest locomotive. The Mallard shattered that crown and still holds the record. And the S1 blurred the lines between legend and reality. Even though diesel and electric trains eventually replaced them, the legacy of these machines lives on. Each locomotive was a voice in a global conversation about speed, strength, and ambition. They weren't just transportation tools. They were expressions of national pride and engineering courage. They proved that steam power, despite its age, could reach unbelievable limits. Today, many of these locomotives still run on special excursions. Fans gather along the tracks just to feel the rumble, hear the whistle, and smell the steam. There's something magical about seeing a living machine, one powered by fire and water, charging down the rails with the same energy it had decades ago. These are more than machines. They're time travelers. And now, let's bring the journey home. If you've made it this far, you've traveled across deserts, mountains, and historic rail lines without ever leaving your seat. You've met locomotives that bent reality, broke records, and changed the world of rail forever. But the story doesn't end with facts and statistics. The true soul of these machines lives in the sensation they created. Imagine standing on a platform in the 1940s. Your heart is already pounding as you hear a distant echo, soft at first, then louder like incoming thunder. You see a small shimmer of steam rising over the horizon. Suddenly the rails begin to tremble. A gust of hot air rushes forward, carrying the smell of coal and metal. Then, like a steel arrow, a locomotive bursts past you at impossible speed, shaking the ground under your feet. That moment stays with you forever. It's mechanical poetry. And every locomotive you've discovered in this journey created moments like that for countless people. Back in South Africa, the Class 25 was more than a desert-crossing giant. For workers and families living near its route, the sound of its chugging engine meant supplies were coming, mail was arriving, or family members were returning home. Its condensation system wasn't just a technical innovation. It was a lifeline for remote towns. The Challenger 3985 wasn't just a wartime machine. When it was restored decades later, it became a symbol of nostalgia. Older rail workers cried when they saw it running again. Younger generations were amazed that something so old could move with such speed and power. During its excursions, people lined up on bridges and sidewalks just to watch it thunder by, phones shaking from the vibration dot and the big boy. That locomotive was never subtle. It was loud, demanding, and larger than life. But for the communities along its route, it meant industry, jobs, expansion, and hope. When a restored big boy returned to the rails in 2019, people followed it across states. Hotels filled up. Towns held events. It wasn't just a train, it was a moving celebration. The Eddystone and Castle class locomotives were part of everyday life in Britain. Before the age of planes and high-speed trains, these engines connected cities and coastlines. Families rode them on holidays. Workers commuted with them. Students left home for the first time aboard them. Even their whistles were woven into the soundscape of the UK. The Norfolk Western 611 gave America a taste of near-modern speed long before bullet trains existed. Imagine cruising at 160 kilometers per hour in the 1950s, powered by nothing more than fire, steel, and water. That's engineering bravery. And when the 611 returned from restoration, thousands bought tickets just to experience that rare feeling again. The DR-18201 remains one of the most beautiful steam locomotives ever built. Painted bright red, streaking across the German countryside at high speeds, it looked like a piece of artwork disguised as a machine. Even today, when it runs special trips, photographers crowd the tracks hoping to capture its graceful silhouette. The Coronation Class and the Mallard represented national pride for the UK. These weren't just trains. They were statements. The Mallard's 202.8 kilometers per hour record still stands because no one has tried to break it. The world moved on to diesel and electric. But that number remains untouched, a monument to a time when engineers pushed limits with courage and imagination. And the S1, even though it lived a short life, continues to fascinate rail fans because it represents ambition without compromise. It was too big, too heavy, and too advanced for its time. But sometimes, that's exactly what makes a machine unforgettable. All these locomotives remind us of something important. Progress doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from pushing boundaries, taking risks, and believing that machines can do more than what seems possible. That's the spirit behind every great locomotive ever built. Now it's your turn. Which one captured your imagination the most? Was it the desert-crossing Class 25? The mountain-crushing Challenger? The record-shattering Mallard? Or maybe the mysterious S1? If you could take a ride behind one of these steel legends, which one would you choose for your final trip on the rails? Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That small click helps this channel grow and lets us keep bringing you incredible stories like this. One stories about machines that pushed the limits of engineering and changed the world. Thanks for joining this journey through time, steam, and raw mechanical power. Until the next video, stay curious, stay fascinated, and keep exploring the extraordinary world of incredible machines.